tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou, and a very warm welcome to everyone here in Chamber today and those who are joining us online. Before we move into our meeting today, I would like to ask if someone would please volunteer to do our opening karakia. Thank you, Petera, and I can see our Councillor O'Keefe is preparing himself for Waiata. Thank you.
Ai, hui mai, koro mai te pōta huri mai rā ki te āwhina i a mātou. Ho mai te mauri o a koutou mahi mā mātou e kaue mo te wāpoto. Ka whakaoki atu ai ki a koutou tūturu e rangi whakamaua ki a tīnā, tīnā, haumi e, hui e, tāe ki e.
Put the mic up.
Kia ora, Councillor O'Keefe. Thank you for letting us in that Waiata. Team, just a reminder that we are live streaming today's proceedings, and for the benefit of those who may be tuning in online, you will see devices in front of elected members. This is so they can access their council papers. I'd also like to acknowledge joining us remotely is Councillor Daniel, who is very kindly keeping an illness to himself, but is proactively joining us online. Thank you for joining us, Councillor Daniel. And I'd also like to acknowledge Mr. Wayne Eagleson, who is joining us for item 5. Welcome. Before we move into the substantive part of today's agenda, I'd first of all like to call for apologies and leave of absence. Do we have any apologies or leaves of absence? Councillor Milmine.
I'd just like to request a leave of absence from the 24th to the 28th of August, please.
Thank you, Councillor Milmine. I'll come now to Councillor Gibson.
We're doing online next week for the first session, and apologies for the 2 workshop sessions for is it Wednesday or Thursday next week?
Okay, so leave of absence for after that first remote one? Excellent. I'll come now to Councillor Teo Skipworth.
Thank you, Worship. Requesting leave for Wednesday the 22nd of July and Tuesday the 28th of July for council business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Teo Skipworth. I'll come now to Councillor O'Keefe.
Kia ora koro matua. I'll be late, should be here by midday, 30th of July and the 12th of August.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any more requests for leave of absence or any apologies? No, in which case I'm happy to move from the chair. Can I please have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Watkins. I'll put those. All those in favour?
Aye.
Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Okay, team, we'll now move on to our usual comment about conflicts of interest. So please keep in mind that as we move through the agenda, if there are any conflicts of interest, please declare them at the time. There are no minutes to confirm, as we haven't had enough of a gap between our previous meeting. You'll all be well aware that we are meeting just about weekly at the moment, which is to keep in line with the huge amount of work ahead of us. That now brings us into item 5. So this is the only substantive item on today's agenda, and it's fair to say it's a significant one. The last major restructuring of local government affecting Hastings was in 1989, when, if you look around this chamber, you will see the Hastings City, the Havelock North Borough, and most of the Hawke's Bay County and some of the Taupo County councils came together to form what is now known as the Hastings District Council. Today we will consider our position on the next steps within the government-led amalgamation process, including whether to continue through what is known as the Head Start pathway. In plain language, the government has made it clear that status quo within Hawke's Bay is not an option and that amalgamation is coming for our region. The choice councils have now been given is whether we help shape that change early by submitting a high-level outline proposal by the 9th of August, or to step back and allow the future structure to be determined through the government's backstop process. Now, I want to be very clear about what we are deciding and debating today and what we are not. Today, Council is being asked to consider and decide whether Hastings remains in that process and help shape the outcome, the steps, or whether or not we step back and we leave it to government to determine the future structure through a backstop process. We'll also be determining and deciding which broad council structure should be developed further, such as one unitary or the north-south split, which we've recently consulted on with our communities. We'll also be looking at which high-level options for regional and local decision-making deserve more work. Now, I want to be clear for our community who may be joining this meeting online and in this chamber, we are not establishing a new council today. We are not approving a final proposal to government, and we are not drawing up the representation map for Hawke's Bay. That's not today's mahi. That means today we will not be debating exactly where ward and local board boundaries will sit, how many elected members each community should have, what every delegation might be, or how local budgets will ultimately operate. The government does not require that full level of detail in the outline proposal by August 9th. It requires councils to identify a credible direction and show there is a workable path for resolving those questions through the detailed design stage if an outline proposal, in principle, is supported by the government. Those representation questions, though, are incredibly important, and I know they are at the forefront of our community's minds. But they do need further careful analysis, continued negotiation between councils, and meaningful engagement with mana whenua and our communities as a whole. What today is about is deciding what deserves to move forward, but not drawing the final map. Because these are complex issues, we will be proceeding with today in a very structured way. We'll begin with an information session from our advisors and officers. And during this, I invite elected members to take the opportunity to ask questions and test information before us. After that, we will move into formal deliberations, and I propose approaching this in two parts. First, we will consider whether Hastings wants to remain as part of the Head Start pathway and the broad structural direction we believe should be developed. Again, that question around one unitary authority or a north-south split. Second, we will then consider and debate high-level governance and representation models, what we would like to continue into the next phase of work. While Hastings needs to be clear about its own position, we must also recognise that under this process, no one council can design a workable regional future alone. Government's been clear on that. Our neighbouring councils are reaching their own decisions today and next week, and any proposal capable of progressing will require further negotiation, sufficient regional agreement, and if an outline proposal receives in-principle support from government, much more detailed work and consultations with the communities it will serve. So this means we should be clear about our preferences today, but we should not speak in absolutes that would close off negotiations still required. That is not avoiding a position, it is recognising that under the government's directions, no single council can impose its preferred model on others. We are working together as a region here, team. On that basis, I'll now invite Nigel to make his introductory comments and then we'll move on with the presentation.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, I'll keep this brief. I think you've covered it very well, but kia ora, good afternoon, councillors. Today is a significant point in the simplifying local government process, but it is not the end of the process. Councillors have obviously had opportunities through a series of workshops to consider the matters, and there are a number of workshops planned in the weeks ahead. We've appreciated the direction that's been provided by council. It's helped focus the work and to be really clear on what matters most for Hastings. If we decide to continue today, it's clear that there are still layers of detail and work that needs to be done ahead of council if it chooses to continue on in the process before it considers an outline proposal on the 5th of August. And as Your Worship, the Mayor said, today is really about three things. Does the council want to continue on in the Head Start process? Does it support a single unitary authority as the preferred model to be developed? And what are the elements of governance and representation that really needs to be worked through for council to consider ahead of the 5th of August decision? So what we will do shortly is have Wayne talk through the governance options and some of the local board arrangements, and then Mr. Charteris present some of the comparative cost information. So with that, Your Worship, I'm happy to invite Wayne.
Welcome, Mr. Eagleson. I'll just ask everyone in chamber to please ensure all microphones are turned off while Mr. Eagleson is briefing us.
One thing, Wayne, sorry, just before I ask you to start, just to reinforce the Mayor's earlier comments that all of the councils are forming their positions over the course of this week, and Wairoa on Tuesday next week. So Central Hawke's Bay District Council resolved this morning to support a single unitary authority for Hawke's Bay with a two-tier decision-making model. Napier City Council are meeting this afternoon, and Wairoa next Tuesday.
Mr. Eagleson, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Your Worship and Council. It's great to see everybody again. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I think as Her Worship has said, as I get onto the local governance stuff, that's really kind of one piece of the jigsaw, and hopefully you will have had a bit of an opportunity to have a look at the slide material that was sent to you. But what I'll do is run through some of the key points, and then happy to take questions. I just at the outset want to thank the team at the IRO for its work in this regard. It's been really useful. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, I think, and we'll test this as we go through it, but a lot of this work is really in response to questions that both the Mayor and Councillor Ratcliffe raised in terms of the potential for local community boards, other kind of initiatives. So look forward to that discussion. So I think if we just jump through to the 5th slide, because I think the first four are all pretty straightforward and we've kind of been here before. Great, if we keep going. Fantastic. Great. I think the really interesting thing for me about this opportunity is that whereas normally your district and other parts of the region would be looking at this in the context of the Local Government Act, it's very clear that the minister and officials have made very clear that actually we've got, if not a blank sheet of paper, certainly a broader opportunity to design what might be arrangements that particularly suit the region. So I think that's important to have in mind, because as the slide notes, under the Local Government Act for unitary authorities, only Auckland has local boards, while others could apply and establish that hasn't really happened. So if we jump to the next one, please. The legislation kind of sets out in a fair bit of detail what the purpose, membership, functions, duties and powers of these boards are. And I'm not going to go through those in detail because, as I say, you've got the material in front of you. But again, I did just want to highlight that on the basis that we get to a point, we can certainly look at using bespoke arrangements. So if we could just jump to the next slide, please. So Auckland, I think, is an interesting case. I should also add that our friends in Auckland have been enormously helpful. So for those of you that will be attending the Regional Collaboration Day next Friday, we'll have a number of local board members online to engage in a discussion. So you can literally ask them directly yourselves about what their learnings have been over a period of time. I mean, it's now some years since Auckland has had this kind of a two-tiered governance structure. and it's an opportunity to see what kind of works and what doesn't work. As you can see there, Auckland, 1 mayor, 20 ward councillors, with a combination of boundaries and so on. What's more interesting from our perspective here, 21 local boards, the members elected chair among themselves, and across all of it, there's 149. And I'm not suggesting you necessarily do this because you've all got many things to do, but if you ever do have 5 minutes free and want to jump on the Auckland City Council website, you can see there the kind of the breadth of the local areas that are covered through it and the kind of nature of the board members. So it's an interesting beast. And as noted there, the decision-making responsibilities are very much shared between the governing body and the local boards, which brings us on to the next one, which sets out, as you say, in a fair amount of detail here. So my understanding, talking to the chief executive at Auckland and a couple of councillors, is that they very much have over a period of time tried to be clear about what are the Auckland-wide strategic decisions that the Auckland Council does, and where issues are much more local and can be pushed down to the local boards. They've sort of tried to do that, and as you can see there, the local boards have some reasonably significant roles. They do get to approve annual operational and capital work programs. They do get to talk about kind of what's going to be happening. Plus, they get to push up a little bit and be involved with the governing body, for its broader responsibility. So as I say, we'll have an opportunity to test this next week. But the sense so far is that the overall system in Auckland is working. We can jump through to the next one. That'd be great. Just to reference here that there are a number of other unitary authorities in New Zealand established in different times and for different reasons. It's worth noting that all of them are much smaller, both in terms of population and geography, than Hawke's Bay, so really that's just a point of comparison. We can jump onto the next slide, please. It is just worth mentioning a couple of other things in terms of other arrangements, and Councillor Ratcliffe, I think, if not, maybe was perhaps the meeting before last, raised the question of things such as citizens' assemblies. You'll note there have been 2 or 3 occasions in specific areas, both in terms of Watercare in Auckland, Wellington City Council, and also one in Gisborne, where they have been used for specific issues and specific decisions. They haven't been used more broadly than that, but potentially could be. And then you see, obviously, there's quite a range across the country in terms of community boards, which you'll be familiar with, obviously, and very much serve as a conduit between the community and the council. So we don't really need to dwell on that, but just wanted to have that there for completeness. We jump on to the next one. And then really just those couple of slides to finish. You'll appreciate that in the time available, we haven't really had the opportunity to do what could be considered in any way to be an exclusive kind of troll around the place. But just to mention that certainly, if you look at the United Kingdom example, both in England, Scotland, and Wales, they do have kind of local councils split into different areas. They could, in theory, they can sit under unitary authorities as a way to sort of bridge that gap, if you like, between a much larger council and a much smaller one. And so there's the reference there to Surrey. And then if we jump onto what I think might be the last slide. Maybe there's one after this. Australia, obviously, Australia is somewhat different because it's a federal environment. I mean, after I left working in Parliament, I did a year off and on doing some work in South Australia for the state government there, and I was amazed that in a state that is about the population of Auckland, just over 1 million people, albeit the landmass of Germany, that it had kind of federal representatives, a state government, an Adelaide City Council with a Lord Mayor and Council, and then quite a range of local shire councils around the place. So it had an enormous amount of governance. In New South Wales, they've used county councils in regional areas, and they've also done quite a lot of shared resources. And one of the highlights there is obviously sort of dam drinking water, but there'll be others as well. We'll just jump to the next one. And finally, Canada, municipal councils are the main kind of governing body, and so we've used the example of Toronto there. Toronto, obviously, very large city, a number of millions of people living there, and they have 4 community councils underneath. and to support the councillor. And each councillor, I think one of the interesting things about this is each councillor is also a member of a sort of a community council underneath it to try and ensure that there's a degree of alignment between what's happening locally and regionally. So, Your Worship, that was really, I was just conscious of time, so that's a reasonably quick run through all the material. As I say, Gus has circulated the full slide pack to elected members for their reference. If there is anything there that members would like to ask questions or raise clarification, certainly interested if there is some, bearing time and what have you. But if there is some more work that people would like, please let us know. So hopefully that's a useful run through of local boards.
Thank you, Mr. Eagleson. Okay, I will come to elected members. This was information that we requested at the last public workshop being brought back to us, and so I'm interested to hear, does anyone have any questions or further information that they would like to ask from Mr. Eagleson? No, okay. In which case, thank you, Mr. Eagleson. You must have clearly communicated all of the points that were raised at the last workshop. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
So, elected members, on that basis, we'll now move into the formal agenda paper. Yep, and so I am going to come to Gus. Sorry, I'm just making sure that we're framing this correctly. So, so Gus, I will come to you. Sorry, Mr. Charteris, I'll come to you first.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just wait for Lynn to bring up the slide pack. And thank you. I thought it might be useful, given that last time we talked about what we could do in terms of some high-level financial modelling and what that would cover. And so I appreciate that the first time that you've seen that is in the paper. So I thought it would be useful just to whip through that and provide an opportunity for you to answer any questions about that. So we have discussed before the big costs sit in the kind of activities and levels of service that you are deciding through LTPs. The parts which we can consider through this process are really around the governance and the support for governance, and in that next tier of how do we organise ourselves around senior staff in particular. So this first part of this model just considers that first component, the governance cost, and so it essentially takes real council data and some standard averages, for example, the cost of executive positions, and it considers the options, both the single and two unitary and the governance options, and then it provides an annual cost and a cost per rating unit, and we can have a look at that. The key thing to note here is that the numbers are almost certainly not perfectly accurate, right? So what you want to do in exercises like this is make sure that you're using the consistent assumptions across the options so that you are highlighting the relativities between status quo and the options. So we can talk about some of the assumptions I've made around, for example, unitary authority councillor salaries, because I know there's interest in that, and these would be bigger positions, and you'd have an expectation that they would be paid more. In practice, it doesn't really matter what cost you pick here, as long as it's broadly right, as long as you're applying that same cost across the options. So just to cover what it includes, and it doesn't include, it includes executive, elected member remuneration, chief executive and general manager costs, and democratic services and governance support, because we know that that's a key component of supporting your and our work, and that's not immaterial. And the more council meetings you have and the more committee structures you have, the greater the servicing cost of that. So that's something that we just need to be clear about. What is excluded, I've talked about the service delivery and future service levels, capital programs, debt treatment, rating matters, one-off transition costs, establishment costs, and staffing optimisation at that next level, and essentially the actual rates impact or rating policy choices. So you would have seen this in your slide pack, but just at a high level, a status quo broadly, remembering this won't be right, but broadly our status quo is suggesting around $16 million based on the, and we've got some reasonably high confidence around that broadly because that's real council data which has been reported in annual plans. Because our options involve less governors, our options are cheaper than the status quo. And so then you get a variation between the options, basically depending on how many councillors you have, whether you've got that dual decision-making structure, and essentially how many committee meetings and local board members you have. So you have a variation there from option A, which is your single level, and then some higher costs when you introduce a 2 level, and then obviously, well, it's not obvious, but then a 2 unitary authority essentially duplicates some of that decision, that governance, and so you've got 2 sets of governors and 2 sets of executive and 2 sets of governing costs. I think what is really interesting and from the modelling is that even the most expensive a single unitary model is cheaper than the cheapest 2 unitary model, which is a key observation. So essentially I've covered some of this. The single level is the simplest and lowest cost, local voice, and we've talked about this before. Local voice is really important. In that context, local voice then relies on wards and your service areas and those related considerations. B is where you've got boards with decision-making responsibility, so that increases the cost because you've got another layer, and obviously real governance-related costs to support that decision-making authority. And then you've got some variation between the other options. It's worth pointing out that that D can look cheaper, and this is the option where you would have not directly elected mayors or regional councillors. Instead, your local board members would become become the unitary authority top table. And because under remuneration authority guidelines, you can't be paid twice for the position, you're essentially just paying those councillors once. So that's why that option looks a bit cheaper. So yeah, the main costs on the 2 unitary variants, you've got 2 mayors, chairs, and 2 councils. And so what we did assume, we have assumed 12 councillors plus 1 mayor for the single unitary. So that's just an assumption. And as long as we're consistent with that across options, it doesn't really matter, but that was the assumption made. For a 2 unitary variant, we assumed that you would have 8 councillors plus a mayor. And so we didn't want to overly inflate the cost of a 2 unitary variant, so we reduced the councillors. Nevertheless, it still comes out at quite a bit more expensive. You've also got 2 chief executives, 2 executive teams, 2 democratic services functions, and importantly, you've got a decent amount of cost that is devoted to joint regional coordination for matters that would cover both areas. So the main drivers, the status quo obviously carries 5 separate organisations, so that's what's driving the real costs there. Executive management is one of the largest cost categories. Local boards materially add governance and support cost because you've got that extra layer, and we've talked about the 2 unitary options, and I've noted the how option C can appear cheaper than B because of that dual role consideration. I thought we thought it would be useful for you to see how that translated into a cost per rating unit. So how would that actually translate into how much people were paying? And so at the moment, Hastings ratepayers are paying each rate paying unit is paying about $180 in order to support that governance and model. If we move to the 1 unitary options, then those costs fall to between 58 and 88, depending on whether you have a single layer of decision making or a dual decision making. So quite a big saving per rating unit, but again, that's just that top level. 2 unit variations, still a saving, but less so because you've got additional costs. So really, we've talked about this before. The financial modelling has given you some more information that verifies this, but essentially the option A, that 1 level, is really the simplest and lowest cost model. It's got clear accountability and regional mandate. it does rely on more design, engagement and service access to protect that local voice, versus option B, where that adds local decision-making boards, it's got a stronger formal local voice in place making decision-making, and consequently costs about $2.3 million more just covering the governance-related aspects. So that's your core financial trade-off. I thought I'd just take a moment just to cover what in other council papers or in other council considerations, debt has been a reasonably significant conversation. It's been raised around our table as well, but rather than add to an already large paper, I just thought it'd be useful just to capture the key figures in a table. But and thank you to our finance staff who have worked through the figures here. But it's interesting to note that our 501.6, and I think there'll be an update to that number because of some assumptions when you consider that in a couple of weeks' time. When you remove the water services debt, our debt sits at around 188 million, and comparatively, Napier sits at around 111. So not reduces that huge difference between 501 down to 172. So that has been quite useful for the conversations between councils because Hastings doesn't actually look so scary when you take out the water related debt. And then you've got CHB, and unfortunately we didn't have data for Whitehall. So we just thought that would be really useful to have because it helps provide a consistent evidence base across councils. And lastly, when I circulated the public engagement material, we hadn't had an opportunity to capture the written feedback, so we've done that now. We had an additional 29 written submissions, and 23 of those preferred one council for Hawke's Bay. 14 out of 29 preferred more local representation, so it was definitely more split on whether you have a single layer of decision making versus a double layer, and again consistent with previous feedback. Lower costs were a consistent theme in the feedback. So what it adds, it confirms strong support for a single Hawke's Bay Council. It adds a stronger local voice signal than the electronic results. It reinforces the need for clear information on rates, debt savings, governance design and local access. And there were specific design issues relating to Māori representation, local boards, wards and coastal communities, some useful flavour there. So that is enough from me. Really happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So we'll focus questions on what Mr. Charteris has just presented to us. Are there any questions? Okay, obviously that was very clear information. Thank you. What was helpful for me in particular was the debt modelling and information when you withdraw the three waters, while also acknowledging that our community under a new water entity will still be paying for that. It is still interesting to understand where the remaining council-related debt sits. And I also found it helpful to understand that the financial modelling at the moment is just assuming 12 councillor, 1 mayor at that unitary authority level, but not that that's the fixed, it's just a basis on which to do the numbers. As we know, the team have been grappling with how do you do numbers when you don't even know if it's 1 or 2 unitaries, when you don't know what the ward makeup will be. They are trying to give us the information we have requested, and so far as they have it at hand. Okay, team. So again, looking at item 5 and just sticking with questions at the moment, we have a comprehensive paper in front of us which covers a big portion of it is what Mr. Charteris has just taken us through. There are other elements in there, so I'll open it up to questions. I'll come first to Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you, Your Worship. Under the community voice options, could you explain the difference between C and D, and why D, I'll just get the words here, weakens direct regional mandate?
also invite Mr. Eagleson at any point to raise his hands and contribute to the conversation. So thank you. So there is a D. I'll start with D and then we'll move to C. So D is where you don't have a directly elected mayor or regional councillors. And so you would have the local board members, the chair and probably a deputy, then stepping up to act as the regional mayor. There is a sense that that model is essentially locking in what we have now. So we have an opportunity, I think, to step back and think about, well, what does really good governance look like for Hawke's Bay in a new model, rather than just locking things down to current boundaries. And so I think what the concern is that you essentially have representatives of small areas essentially just advocating for those small areas rather than taking a complete regional perspective. So that is part of it, and I'll ask Mr. Eagleson to add any flavour to that before moving to C.
Absolutely. Through you, Your Worship. Gus, yes, that I think it's exactly the way to. So I'm getting a bit of feedback. I don't know whether you guys are.
What I'll do, Mr. Eagleson, I'm just going to note down those who've got microphones on, and I'll come back to those speakers. We'll all now turn them off so you don't have that horrible feedback.
Sorry, the joys of technology, right? Look, I think the way Gus has described it is exactly right. The thing is that, and you see it in other organisations and other fields as well, where you get this tension between kind of people that are sort of, locally elected, if you like, and then bumped up to a broader body versus those that are elected onto that body with the intention that they have a much broader perspective. And so I think that's why Councillor Corbett in there's that reference to weakening the regional mandate overall. So they're two different models, and it's worth teasing them out, but they definitely have their strengths and weaknesses.
Thank you, Mr. Eagleson. Does that answer your question, Councillor Corbin?
It answered my second question, but not my first one.
We'll come now back to option C, which I understand you had questions around. Mr. Charteris, would you like to take that, or would you like Mr. Eagleson to?
I can start through you, Mayor, and essentially C is sort of a lesser version of that, because you've got a combination at that top table of directly elected mayor and regional councillors working alongside local boards. And again, that may work, but it could also create complications with a lack of role clarity and delineation of roles. And so the way that Auckland works is you've got regionally significant and strategic decisions being made around the regional table, and then you've got delegated responsibilities for local boards. Really C is a blending of that. And I think there is some concern about what are the different dynamics that blending could create. We don't have a model which we can look to, but there is some concern that blending may risk that delineation of role.
Yeah. And is the election of councillors at large or in wards?
We haven't determined that yet, Councillor. We're not at that level.
I might just invite Mr. Eagleson to colour in any flavour if you think I've missed anything.
Team, can you all turn off your microphones, please? I have noted your names.
Yeah, apologies. Look, only briefly that as members around this table would imagine, this whole area is quite a strong area of interest for people in Central Hawke's Bay and potentially others. I mean, that this whole question about how you get local voice, how you ensure that local decisions are made as locally as possible, leaving aside the delivery issue. How do you link those two things in together? So this has been a matter of some debate, and there are some, I think as Gus has made the point, there are some trade-offs here. I think the other thing is, I just refer back to some of my earlier comments, when the Auckland Council team will be available online at the Regional Collaboration Day. These are the kind of questions that would be worth talking about them, because they've now had some experience about how they've effectively blended, obviously in a very large city environment by New Zealand standards, how they've managed to blend what is a two-tier point. And I'd refer you back to the slide, I can't remember which one, but in the pack of stuff that Gus sent out yesterday, where it talks a little bit about functions that would be handled at a regional level versus functions that would be handled lower down.
Councillor Corbyn, thank you. Okay, I'm going to now ask you to turn on your microphones in this order, team. Can I please have Councillor Milmine, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Gibson, and then anyone else who would like to can join the queue. So we'll come first to Councillor Milmine.
Thank you, through your worship. Are we able to understand, you mentioned that CHB have decided or put a recommendation for a two-tier governance. Are we able to know which one of the models they have preferred?
Officers, do we have their recommendations at hand?
Yes, we do. So what they were clear on is that they sort of ruled out just the single level governance and ruled out the advisory and left the three options, B, C and D, with that detail to be worked through between other councils.
Thank you. Another question, if I may.
Yes.
Do we know when we'll get, or when the feedback ends for Wairoa? And when we'll have the community feedback?
So again, through you, Your Worship, we understand that Wairoa had workshops this week and are meeting next Tuesday.
Thank you. And so I have another question. In section 1.14, it mentions that we'll be if we did continue with the process through the Head Start pathway, that we would be requesting appropriate relief for the legislative and regulatory. Just wondering if there is an intention to also request funding support and for that transitional and the time that's already been put into it.
I'll speak briefly to this from a political standpoint. I've met with ministers a number of times now, and this has been raised, and a fairly clear indication thus far has come back that no, there will not be any funding support, but I'm sure we could ask again.
Right, thank you.
Okay, I'll come now to Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. In terms of recommendation D, if one is chosen by council, which is single unitary authority, then if D1 is agreed, that is a single unitary authority, it says the council agrees to the following contingent pathway. If any participating Hawke's Bay councils choose not to continue at this stage, then it goes 1, a new unitary authority for only part of the region, a new unitary authority for some or not for all of the 4 territorial authorities. So my first question is, does that mean if one of the other councils doesn't want to take part, we're not going to include them in our submission? Pretty much.
I think in that, through you, Chair, I think in that context, we would say, look, it's unfortunate that our partner council X hasn't decided to move forward with us. We are a region and we love our regional whānau, and we would welcome their reconsideration at a future point. And I think given where the government has signalled, it would be prudent for us to be developing that model with that in mind. So we move ahead on the basis of the facts, and then we develop the model with the expectation, well, with the thought that the government may then decide to suggest that council play with us.
Yep. So just to thank you, Mr. Chattis, just to repeat that, if another council doesn't want to take part, we would respect that wishes in terms of the region's unity, and then leave it up to the government really basically as a backstop, because that's what effectively it would default to, rather than, because my next question to your worship is we do actually have the option of including them as part of our proposal, don't we? Yeah, so that recommendation is saying if they don't want to come to the party, we're going to leave them out, but then we risk, which I suppose would affect them more than would affect us, I guess what you're saying. And through your worship, my second question is I'm struggling to understand why, with a population of, I think, 190,000, in terms of local boards, where local boards have suddenly come from, in terms of does the officers that have drafted up the local boards, is the system broken?
Through you, Chair.
I'm happy. Oh, sorry.
You go, Mr. Eggleston.
Okay, so just one moment. I'm going to note down the names of the upcoming speakers. I think I got them all down. If I miss you, you will let me know. So we'll now turn off microphones and come to you, Mr. Eagleson.
My apologies again. Look, I think that's an interesting question. I don't know whether it's necessarily a judgment about whether the system is broken or not, or whether it would be broken, but it's really been driven by a view in different parts of the region that actually, there are significant communities of interest that are straight, as we've talked about before, that a straight population funding basis may not always work. I mean, there are ways of dealing with that. But then, if all of the decision making is undertaken in this one unitary authority across the region, that there'll be a number of local decisions that perhaps could be made more locally, hence the need for a second tier. So it's really been that debate, and it won't come as any great surprise to know that both at Wairoa and Central Hawke's Bay, there's been a quite strong view around local decision making. So I think that's one of the trade-offs to discuss.
Also, through your worship, so it could still, but that we could still come to that place, especially in terms of a cost, if there were, say, more councillors, potentially. Yep, potentially. So in other words, through your worship, instead of, if you just prorated it, you might say, well, to cover that, we are going to have more of a single tier, but more councillors, and the cost would likely be possibly the same, but need to be worked out. But yeah, because but through, am I allowed to have a, I'm just asking questions. And
Yeah, questions are fine.
Yep, that's fine. And I think, that was all. Yep. Leave the other one for.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Okay, I'll come now. Next on my speaking list was Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Your Worship. In B, we've got the word mayors suddenly popped back. I'm pretty sure that never used to be. In B, it was reflected of E with decision making, from my understanding. I'm just not a fan of watered down mayors, that's all.
I agree with you, Councillor Gibson. This was something we raised at our workshop. I suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Eagleson, it has popped up again because it's a preference elsewhere in the region. Is that correct?
I'm not even, Your Worship. Oops.
Oh, sorry, team. We're going to turn off our microphones again. I've got you noted.
I'm not even sure I'd state it to that. It could well be that simply that as as people are putting together the slides and we're doing it, that every now and again we default back to the old wording. So I wouldn't read too much into it. But we'll take your preference back and have a discussion about language.
And Councillor Gibson, I'm certainly prepared for us to feed that back, because I agree with you as well. Okay, so we'll come now to Councillor Nixon, who was next, and then Councillor Lorcan.
Didn't realise I was next. I suppose the first question I've got is, does it really matter if we don't have cohesion across the four councils, since the backstop presumably will just pick it up and take over and make the decision for us? I mean, is it really a problem?
Through you, Chair, I think this comes back to the question that the Mayor started with. Do we want to have some destiny over what we look like versus the government choosing that for us? So that's a fundamental choice. I think my own perspective is, if we are going to transition, if you do make the choice to move forward, it's going to be so much easier working with willing partners.
I agree.
Rather than being forced to do something against people's will, because you can imagine bringing different agencies together who don't want to be together. That would be a very significant transition risk.
I'm not suggesting it's a desired course, just a reality. I've got a second question, if I could, and this is to do with local boards, because we talked at the beginning of possibility of a council of 12 councillors and a mayor. Now, in the two main centres of Napier and Hastings, it probably represents reasonable representation. I mean, maybe 4 in each. I'm just making these numbers up, so I don't want to be taken too literally. But in the smaller centres, such as Wairoa and CHB, the situation is different, because you could almost get down to one representative. And so would it be possible to have say, local boards in those areas, but not in the major centres? Is that an we never talked about it because I didn't think of the question earlier on.
Through you, Chair, great question. This is really the focus of the next part of the conversation we want to have with you. So what would, depending on the choices you make today, what would that top table look like? How would you represent the region at that top table? And then to go to Deputy Mayor's question, then what problem are you solving in having local boards if that's a preference? Like what would they do? So this really is these are the right questions for the next stage of the work. And as you say, on a purely population basis, you might have certain levels of representation that may or may not be acceptable, and we may need to think about different ways, which we can do under the Local Government Act now. It doesn't restrict you to population. It could be geography, communities of interest, other matters. And so these are the bits of work that we need to do.
I think that was the answer I was looking for.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. We'll come now to Councillor Lorcan.
Yes, thank you, and through your chair, just reiterating what Councillor Gibson brought up about the mayors. I had noticed that as well, and it was something that Councillor Monteperto Hendry had brought up way back in our very first workshop. So yeah, just wanting to clarify that. My other question, well, my actual question was just looking at 4.48. It says that at the time of writing, Wairoa District Council's public consultation feedback wasn't available. Is it available now? So why? And what were their reasons?
I will note that they have just had a flooding incident, which has thrown their schedule somewhat into disarray. As I understand it, Wairoa's initial plan was to actually meet and decide this on Tuesday this week. But obviously, given the events that have taken place in their community over the weekend, they've delayed that to next Tuesday. But if there's any further information from officers, please feel free to share. Okay, I'll come now to Councillor Noel Lustig.
Thank you, Chair. Just to tweak Councillor Nixon's question that having boards in CHB and Wairoa, that perhaps we also could look at for the retaining them in the rural areas of the HDC.
Thank you, Councillor Noel Lustig. And I think certainly what we're all touching on is the big body of work that comes next, depending on where we steer today. So again, we're not making any final decisions today. We're just simply guiding the officers on Hastings' preference in the greater regional context of where we see the next body of work happening. Certainly from my personal perspective, and I'll tack on to the end of what you've just said, Councillor Noel Lustig, I would be very interested in us taking a very big step back and not assuming any existing boundaries or councils, and actually looking at the region as a complete picture and going, what makes sense when you don't have existing lines at all, and rebuilding from there. Because I think we'll find we have huge similarities in our rural communities with CHB and Wairoa. Equally, there's huge similarities in the urban communities of Hastings and Napier. We have expansive coastal areas which go through all of the current councils, and those are just to name a few. And within all of those areas, there are also very important communities of interest. Not to mention, mana whenua have a role to play in this too. It is critically important, and it has been outlined by the government as well as something that we may need to consider in this process. So I personally believe the best way forward is not starting at where the boundaries can currently exist, but actually thinking bigger than that. I think that's what I hear from our community wanting from us. I'll now move on to Councillor Milne.
Thank you, through your worship. Section 3.6 just notes the government's guidance and the criteria, the 5 criteria points that I'll be looking at. So I assume that's for at this first Head Start pathway stage, or it says that, if we were to progress with that. We haven't had any discussions around, well, we've only been talking about the form, not the function yet. And I note that it has to support the new planning system. So just wondering if there's any work being done on that and if that will be coming to us in a future workshop.
Excellent question. Thank you, Councillor.
And through you, Mayor, it was definitely one of our criteria through the multi-criteria analysis, because it's a clear, the government's been very clear that that's one of the key criteria. And so when we considered that through that work, a single unitary authority was very clearly going to be able to deliver that criteria better than a two unitary authority, because a two unitary authority would be splitting the catchment, and you would need a coordination mechanism that would sit over that in order to make that work. So in terms of simplification, less complexity, better able to do that work, a single unitary was the best option.
I'll come now to Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are you ready for a steer?
Not yet,
No.
Councillor, we're taking questions. Thank you. I'll come now to Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Your Worship, but I think what I was going to say probably constitutes a stare as well.
Then I'll ask you to take a seat. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Teo Skipworth, did you have a question?
No, I was going to steer the whole way.
We have very many eager beavers. Thank you, team. I appreciate that. When we do move into deliberations, I will let you know how we're going to work through them. But anyway, we'll come now, still in question time, to Councillor Lorcan.
Thank you, me Wendy, and through you, and I'm a little bit, I may have got this all wrong, but I just wanted to just kind of check. It's a question. So in 4.16, it says the government's guidance is also clear that councils participating in the Head Start process are not constrained by the current Local Government Act requirements, and that innovative approaches to local government structures could be considered. So then when you look at 4.51 of engagement with mana whenua authorities, where it outlines that council's obligations under Section 81 of the Local Government Act 2002 require local authorities to establish and maintain processes that provide Māori to contribute to decision making and provide relevant information to Māori for those purposes. Could that all become null and void if we don't do this properly?
Mr. Charteris.
Through you, Chair, it's a good question, and I'll just, before the meeting, I just brought up the DIA guidance on Māori representation. It just might be useful just to read that section, their advice to you. So there were two parts of it. There was the arrangements provided through treaty settlement redress, and they were quite specific in that those treaty settlement matters needed to be carried across at least maintain those commitments. Under how will iwi Māori participate in decision making? This is the guidance from government. What are the opportunities for Māori to contribute to local government decision making processes as required under the Local Government Act 2002? This could involve identifying any existing relationship agreements or arrangements between councils and iwi and hapu, as well as any processes that support Māori to contribute to local decision making, and considering how these may transfer to new unitary authorities. So the guidance has been clear that that's still a matter of some significance. And so what I would read from that is that, yes, while the legislation may be bespoke and different, that is a matter that they would see carried across into that legislation.
I did see Councillor Daniel's hand go up. Do you have a question, Councillor Daniel?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Lorcan sort of dived into my question, but I will sort of follow that up with how has our engagement with mana whenua been going? I know that there's some commentary in 4.61 and throughout the report, and I also know, I think it is 6.6 that talks about certain proposals and yada yada needs to be fully acknowledged, and if all those risks that we talk about around our treaty settlements and engagement, will all that information come back to us on the 23rd on that workshop?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, it certainly can. I think we have engaged both broadly with TKO as well as our own post-settlement iwi entities, Tai Whenua. The position, I think, has been very clear and communicated in writing, where they support a single unitary authority for Hawke's Bay, expect to see, which the government has set as a baseline, treaty settlements upheld, looking for effective representation and genuine engagement through the process is what's been reflected as their position.
Councillor Teo Skipworth.
Thank you, Worship. My good learned friend here has said it's okay for me to move when we're ready.
Okay, we're not taking movers at the moment, team. We're in question time, please. So we'll hone in on that, please. Questions. Okay, so I have a question regarding 4.93, which is around the legislative and regulatory relief that we are proposing, specifically asking for in any proposal that may be put forward. I think this is particularly important because I think we've estimated with officers that for HDC to do a representation review, which we are legislatively required to do right now, would cost our ratepayers in the vicinity of $100,000 or more, and could then very quickly be superseded by an amalgamation, which is a ridiculous, wasteful use of ratepayers' money, and not to mention precious staff time working on any form of transition, but also finding those efficiencies and savings we've all tasked them with. I note within this that we will be seeking relief, but I also note that if we don't get that, if the government does not provide it, we are going to have to carry forward with a representation review. It is triggered by the referendum, which has seen the removal of Māori wards from the next election. And really, if we do choose today to take the risk of not progressing that work, because we should be doing it now in order to meet the legislative timeframes, if we choose to pause that work and take the risk while government considers our proposal, it will really only leave us with one valid option if they reject that, which is falling back to the representation model that existed around this table before we established Māori wards. We won't have time to do a complete and comprehensive from the ground up representation review. So I just want to make sure everyone's really aware of that, and also ask the officers, have I captured that correctly, or am I missing anything?
Captured it perfectly, Your Worship.
So team, I put that out there just to make sure everyone's noted that, because it's a significant piece of the paper. So I'll come now to Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you, Your Worship. Have there been any significant population shifts since the, since two representation reviews ago?
And how will that be handled, I think is the question. Mr. Cameron.
It's a challenge each time we deal with a representation review is how you deal with the smaller statistical blocks. So, in answer to your question, I'll answer your question in two levels. There's not significant population movements at the macro level, but there's population movements at what's potentially your ward level that we would have to consider in a representation review. Plus, account, as Your Worship said before, for the loss of Takitimu wards.
I'll come now to Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Could I just go back to a comment you made a minute ago about the representation review? I can't remember it being in there, but if it is, I've forgotten it.
It is 4.93.
Oh, well, could you just remind me, when does that have to take place?
Mr. Cameron, I'll come to you.
There's two tiers to that question. It's a comprehensive process, so in an ideal world, we would be onwards from our preliminary engagement processes probably by September this year. From a statute point of view, Council needs to have adopted a statement of proposal for engagement pragmatically by June next year. By statute, I think it's November next year. So, yes, in an ideal world, the initial stages probably from September, October this year. From a legislation point of view, you need to be well underway probably by April, May next year under the current law.
Can I just go back and ask you another question, Your Worship? Listening to Mr. Cameron's response, not going to work, is it? I mean, how can we undertake a representation review when we're going through such monumental changes?
Which is exactly the point.
Is it in any way practical? What's our answer?
It's exactly the point we've made with government already, and spoken to ministers about several times now, and it has been raised more broadly because it's not an issue that is constrained just to Hastings. This is an issue around the country, particularly where there were referendums at the last election that have saw different outcomes. Unfortunately, the message so far from the Minister has been, oh, we don't have enough time right now. We've re-emphasised, and I know LGNZ are putting pressure on, and certainly as part of our proposal, we need to be insisting on that relief, because otherwise, comments around wasteful spending are made quite regularly about local government. This would be the ultimate version of wasteful spending, us doing a representation review for an entity that will not exist at the next election if amalgamation goes ahead. It is absurd.
Can I just ask another question, following on from that? Is it possible that we can make assumptions and put them into our proposal, or does that just not work either?
Are you talking about the representation review, or are you talking about the representation of the new council?
The form of the representation.
The former?
The form. The manner of representation.
So we need to be very careful for the outline proposal we're putting forward. We're not going to have all the answers, but I will come to Mr. Charteris. Do you have a comment?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. So that is a live question. When Auckland amalgamated, the work that if you choose to take forward the Head Start proposal, the work that we would do and put in a proposal on the 9th of August, the work between 9th of August and when the final submission is due in March 2027, that work would essentially constitute a quasi representation review, where we would be working through, well, exactly how are you represented at that top table? Is it ward structures, whatever? And then how do you work through those local boards? That essentially would be a quasi representation review. The government would probably take that proposal and say thank you. In the following, so that would be used for the election of that unitary authority in 2028. In that that next 6-year period, that would be an opportunity to do a ground-up representation review for that new unitary authority. So that is a likely scenario. Not suggesting that that will be the scenario, but that is a likely scenario.
Thank you. That more or less cut off my next questions I want to ask.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. The other thing I'd just like to highlight and ask questions around is 4.89, which is the second part of the regulatory relief being sought, which is for the long-term plan development. Just to make sure that it's crystal clear in everyone's mind, and including the community, Mr. Charteris, Mr. Bickle, could one of you please explain exactly what we're asking for there and why?
Through you, Worship, I'll start. I think what we're seeking as part of the regulatory relief is a bit like what happened post-Cyclone Gabrielle, where we're not subjected to the full audit process and all the time and cost that goes with that. That's what we would seek to put in an outline proposal if that's where the councils end up. Again, if you're kind of speculating around scenarios, I think ministers and the government have been pretty clear they've run out of runway in this term of Parliament to make any changes to the law. So given the timing and when we would normally be starting audits on a long-term plan, which is the end of the calendar year, early next year. But again, I think the point is that we would be seeking, through any outline proposal, to seek regulatory relief in that regard.
It would also make little sense for us to do a fully audited and projected out 10-year long-term plan when, again, this entity in its current form will not exist. And we know that for a fact. Either we're doing it to ourselves or the government's doing it to us. So that's the other part that's being sought. Are there any other questions, team? Okay, in which case we're now going to move into deliberations. And as we do, I just want to take a moment to reflect back what we've heard, not just today, but also from our community. Today we've heard some really good questions, and I thank you, and I know that actually a lot of them have already been surfaced as part of our workshops as well. So while it was concise today, it's because we've spent many hours traversing this topic. I also want to think about the hui that we've had recently with neighbouring councils. That's been incredibly valuable to understand where their stress and concern points are, and also where they see the opportunities. And probably the biggest thing that came out of that process for me was how similar we are. We agree on so much more than we disagree on. And I think that's a pretty fantastic basis for our wider Hawke's Bay community for us to be at that point. We've also, as we all know, heard directly from our communities. That's included the council surveys that we've had information on today. It's been the meetings and the drop-ins, because I know many of you have met with your local constituents as well. And it's also come through meeting people where they're at. So I know from my own perspective, I've been to a huge number of community-led meetings and conversations over the last couple of months. It's been a mix of senior groups, Rotary clubs, businesses, growers and horticulturalists coming together, mana whenua, and just everyday people from across Hawke's Bay that have been hitting us up wherever we are, whether it's the sports sidelines or the supermarket or wherever we are in our communities. The views that have been expressed have not all been the same, and nor should we expect that. We have an incredibly diverse community, but there have certainly been some clear themes that have emerged. People have consistently wanted to know that amalgamation will genuinely simplify local government, rather than just replace the current system with new layers of complexity. They want confidence that rural, remote and smaller communities will continue to be heard. And we hear that loud and clear, in particular from our own rural community, but also from CHB, Wairoa, and I'm also going to put into that our coastal community too. They want rates, services and investment to be fair in the future. They want regional issues to be managed more effectively. And they want communities to have a meaningful role in shaping whatever comes next. We see that in all of the feedback we've received. Those questions, the concerns and the preferences that our community have shared and we've heard around this table and we've heard from our neighbours have been informing all of our thinking. And based on all of that, I've turned my mind to what I believe is a constructive pathway forward. It's a pathway that I believe allows Hastings to provide a clear direction while preserving that all-important room needed for ongoing negotiation with our neighbouring councils. Because again, it's important to acknowledge no one council or councillor can design the regional reorganisation on their own. We have to do this together. And so it has to reflect what all the communities across Hawke's Bay have been telling us, without pretending that the detailed design is actually going to be all sorted by the 9th of August. I have a strong belief that if this reform is to lay a positive and enduring foundation for future generations, which should be our goal, community voice has to be built into that right from the beginning and not just at the end. And that's why any outline proposal put forward to government must make it clear that detailed governance and representation arrangements will be shaped through meaningful engagement and consultation with mana whenua and our wider communities. With that in mind, I have drafted a revised set of recommendations that I believe provides a clear and consistent pathway forward. They do vary from those that are in your pack. So what I'm going to ask the staff to do, because I have drawn them up and printed them out, is I'm going to ask them to circulate them. They're broken into two parts because, as I said at the start of this meeting, I believe we're best to debate and vote in two parts. And they are long because I've tried to capture everything that I've heard from this table, but also our community as we've moved through this. So I'm going to get the team to circulate them, and then we're going to have a 15-minute break. It's an opportunity for everyone to stretch their legs, but also an opportunity to read through them, because this is not something I think we should speed read and rush decision-making on. This is reshaping governance for the future generations. So if everyone can take that moment, and we will reconvene at 2:30. Councillor Daniel, we will email these recommendations to you. Okay, team, we'll reconvene. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to have a look at the draft recommendations that I've circulated. Because of the complexity of the decisions we're making today, I believe we should move the recommendations in two parts, and we'll debate them in two parts. So what essentially I'm suggesting we look at first and foremost is that I'll move the recommendations I've circulated A to E, just as the first batch, which will be looking at receiving the report, noting that we've been part of the memorandum of understanding with our neighbouring councils to explore the Head Start process. And then the proposal is that the recommendations resolve to remain in the Head Start process, and that the preferred local government reorganisation option for Hawke's Bay, from our perspective, is a single unitary authority, inclusive of Central Hawke's Bay, Hastings, Napier and Wairoa. It also then moves into that council authorises the chief executive to have council officers working with the Simplifying Local Government Reference Group to prepare a draft proposal for a single unitary authority for council deliberation and future council decisions. And then E also covers that council resolves in the event of one or more of the four Hawke's Bay local authorities in recommendation C2 decide not to continue in the Head Start process, the Chief Executive is authorised to continue development of a draft proposal for a single unitary authority for council deliberation and future decisions, and ensure, so far as is practicable, and subject to the government's final policy and or legislative settings, the proposal for a single Hawke's Bay unitary authority is able to accommodate the inclusion of a Hawke's Bay local authority or authorities who opted out of the Head Start process but are subsequently required by the Crown to be included in the single unitary authority for Hawke's Bay. What I'm trying to achieve with that final recommendation, E, is to acknowledge that if one of our neighbouring councils chooses to exclude themselves from this process and opt for the backstop, there is a very high probability that their backstop could be part of our Head Start. And if we do a huge amount of work assuming that one neighbouring council was not included in this, without considering them, they could be wedged in near the end of the process and unravel a whole bunch of work done by the rest of the region. So as part of that recommendation, we are asking the officers, the Chief Executive and the neighbouring councils to work together to try and make sure that we leave the door open for anyone who chooses not to progress at this stage. So those are the recommendations, A to E. I'm now seeking a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Nixon. So we have a substantive motion on the table, bearing in mind we're only focusing on recommendations A to E at this stage. And we'll now move into any questions first, because the recommendations are different from those in your packs. So if you've got any questions you would like to ask of officers or myself, now's a good time to do it. Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think there's just a word missing in E2. I'd suggest Hawke's Bay Unitary Authority is able to accommodate inclusion of any Hawke's Bay local authority who opted out of the Head Start. I think it's just a typo. Effectively, the sentence just is a bit clumsy without it.
I'll just ask Democratic support to identify that. Yeah, great. We will make that amendment to the final recommendations.
Thank you. Happy to support.
Okay, team, so opening up for debate just on A to E, which is essentially the proposal on the table is that we become one unitary authority, or explore the proposal to become one unitary authority with all of our neighbouring councils. And we leave the door open for any that may choose not to progress right now. Is there any debate or comments? Councillor Teo Skipworth.
Thank you, Worship. Just seeking clarification around those points. So we're exploring options with a one unitary authority.
Correct.
And your commentary was because with the backstop, it's likely. But given that there's elections coming up in November 7, and should there be a change of government, it may not be likely, or it may be likely. But are we exploring just that, or are we going to explore if one pulled out? I mean, if one decided not to. I'm not saying that's what we should. I'm just seeking your clarification on what your proposal says.
The intention of the wording, and thank you, councillor, the intention of the wording is to allow the development of proposal to continue with those who are willing parties, but just leaving the door open. So it's not forcing anyone in, it's not making any decisions, it's just leaving the door open so we don't duplicate work later.
Follow up if I may. So that means, just say if one council decided not to, and then the backstop didn't force them to, we've got the modelling without? Thank
That's the
you.
intention.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'll come now to councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. To me, the items A to E are just so utterly logical, I really can't see that we can do anything else. To do anything else actually puts in yet more layers of local government. This is about simplifying local government and actually progressing forward. There's nothing controversial in this as far as I'm concerned. Yes, some councils may not agree, but we've catered for that because we've said, this is what we propose. They can oppose it, that's fine. It can then go to the backstop and we'll let government resolve it for us, because that's the only way it can be resolved if we don't get agreement around our 5 councils, including regional council. The regional council is already in the process of being disestablished anyway. So I have no problem seconding the motion for these A to E.
Thank you, councillor Nixon. I'll come now to Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Yep, thank you, Your Worship. I also too are in favour of this. As a historian, I had an outline for a book called Sibling Rivalry, Napier versus Hastings, and all the things over the course of the history of Hawke's Bay which had probably damaged the region. So I see working together as one authority as being good for the region, and also better for the public to deal with one set of rules, one set of one authority. And I'll just finish with Sir James Wattie, the well-known creator of tomato sauce and baked beans, here in world famous in Hastings. After one of the squabbles in the early 1970s said, I don't know what this is all about, I'm a Hawkeye guy. And he was referring to that Napier and Hastings and Wairau and Central Hawke's Bay all got together and supported the Hawke's Bay rugby team, and why can't we do that as a region?
Okay, I will now come to councillor Milne.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. I too support this A to E, and I think if I take on board what we've heard from the community, to me this absolutely encapsulates that. So yeah, we've got my full support with it.
Are there any other comments or debate? Councillor O'Keefe.
Refer to my notes here. No, I support this. I mean, we know the reality. If we don't attempt to shape our future, government are going to do it for us. So I strongly favour a full amalgamation. You know, one clear voice for Hawke's Bay, rather than tutu on down to Pōneke, fragmented. And, you know, we're not going to get a hell of a lot of leverage that way. One clear voice. And it's better value for the ratepayers, isn't it? No more duplication. We come together, pool our resources, invest in what matters most for our region. We're stronger together. There's no doubt about that. Whether it's cyclone recovery, our roads or growth, we'll rise and we'll fall as one rohe. There's no doubt about that. So let us decide, not outsiders. We don't want outsiders deciding our destiny. This is our chance. This is our chance to build a structure that works for the entire community, for the entire region. That's Henare chapter 1, verse 5.
Thank you, councillor O'Keefe. Is there anyone else who would like to speak for or against the motion?
Oh, sorry.
Malcolm Hunley.
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I certainly support it. I see this as a chance of parochialism, not for Napier and Hastings, but for Hawke's Bay.
Nicely put, Councillor Watkins. I'll come now to Councillor Lorcan.
Yes, through you, Your Worship. I absolutely support this. I've supported this way back when and have supported it right through, and certainly looking at all the public submissions, the feedback, the conversations that I've had about this with people right across the board. Everyone is a proud Hawke's Bayian, not Napier Hastings, Havelock, CHP. We're all in this together, and I think this is a great first step.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to say, go the Magpies.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Is there any other speakers for or against the motion? No, then I'll take my right of reply on these recommendations, which is, put simply, we are better together. One unitary makes so much sense. And we've heard from our community very clearly that our boundaries, our existing council boundaries, are not actually recognised by everyday life. You know, our rivers and our catchments cross over them, our transport networks, our civil defence, our housing, all of the important things that keep us driving forward. And I believe one unitary authority offers the clearest opportunity to bring all the responsibilities together under one regional mandate with clearer accountability and a lot less duplication. I also do just want to take a minute again to acknowledge that amalgamation does not require our communities to lose their identity, because I know that has been the biggest concern in this process with everyone at every level. Hastings, Napier, Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa, we will all remain those distinct places with our own histories and our priorities and our community connections. And Hastings is real living proof of what happens when it can go right. Again, I reflect back to those 1989 amalgamation. Rural communities at the time raised serious concerns about representation, rates, and whether decisions would be actually heard from their basis. And we've worked through that. We've addressed that, and it's not perfect. I'm not saying it is perfect, because no model of democracy is ever perfect. But what I do see Hastings as is living proof that urban, rural and coastal communities can come together under one council and build a successful future together. The lesson is not that amalgamation is automatically successful. The lesson is that we can succeed when local voice, fairness and community connection are treated as essential parts of the design. So, I'm going to put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried unanimously. So that's step one, and I actually think we need to take a minute, team. That's huge. This is a historic moment. The work's not done, but this is huge for our region. Okay, team. So, as I said, we're breaking the recommendations into two parts. So now what we're looking at is recommendations F to K. Now, I've drafted up a starter for 6, and I'm not automatically assuming everyone or even anyone will agree. But what I would like to do is take a few moments to explain my logic behind these recommendations, because this is where we're starting to give a high-level indication of a preference from Hastings, not the final decision. None of these recommendations slam the door on an option. What it is saying, though, is it's highlighting ones that, when I look at our community feedback, and not just what we've received through feedback and surveys, but what I've heard on the ground, finds the greatest balance between representation and those cost savings that the community is asking for. And it is, I mean, that is the biggest challenge we've heard. It's how do we create a simpler and more efficient regional system while ensuring that communities still have a meaningful voice? That is the tension. Local voice is absolutely critical. But the more governing bodies we create, the more cost we introduce. And we need to remember that the Local Government Act still allows, at any stage, for whatever entity model to step up things like citizens' assemblies if they would like to do so. So we're not limiting those options either. The risk in the process is that we begin with existing structures and then try to wedge a new regional entity into them. I believe if we do that, we've failed. We need to be asking first, what representation and local voice will best serve the entire region and the communities in the future, not just what we have now. And I believe what our communities have been asking us to do is way broader. Like I said earlier, I think they are asking us to step back and reimagine how the entire region could work more effectively and construct the mechanism that supports local voice from there. Testing whether communities can influence the decisions that affect them, because they must be able to. Whether representation is fair and properly resourced, because that's critical as well. Whether local needs are actually understood, because you do need to have people connected to them, and whether people can see clearly who is accountable to them. Amalgamation that just reproduces today's structures, but under new names, in my view, and from what I've read from our community's feedback, would not be a genuine simplification, and it would not do what I believe Hawke's Bay is asking from us as a whole. Equally, a structure that is efficient on paper, but then leaves out rural, remote, or distinct communities and leaves them feeling disconnected, that wouldn't provide a strong foundation for a future either. So on that basis, my proposed recommendations identify two preferred models for further development. And you may agree or you may disagree with me. The first is the single-tiered model, with one elected mayor and ward councillors making the decisions for Hawke's Bay. The reason why I've highlighted that as a preferred option, and it's not the only option, it's one to be explored, is the model provides the clearest line of accountability and the greatest opportunity to simplify governance, reduce duplication, and make decisions in the interests of the region as a whole. But it also comes with the challenge of adequately addressing the genuine concerns of our neighbours and our own communities when it comes to ensuring that they are fairly and efficiently represented and can have influence over the larger entity. So I acknowledge that's the tension in that option, which is why I think it should be worked up with that view in mind. Can we solve that tension? The next one is the second option is a two-tier model, with one regional governing body and elected local boards making genuinely local decisions under clearly defined arrangements. That model could provide for stronger formal local decision-making and support the amplification of the needs and voices from across the whole region. But we must be honest that it will also bring likely additional cost and complexity, and we must carefully test and justify that, which is why I think it should be another one of the options we work up. With these recommendations, I'm not asking Council to choose between those two models today, and nor am I suggesting that useful elements from the other models could not inform the work. But what I am asking Council to do is identify that models A and B could be the ones that we base initial detailed development on, because together they allow us to test the central trade-offs incredibly honestly. How much can and should be decided regionally? What decisions are genuinely local and need that local board voice? And whether an additional elected tier adds enough value to justify the cost and complexity it creates. And I don't have a view on that. I simply say that we need more information. Elements from the other models may still work, which is why my recommendations are not designed to close off options C or D. But we do need a coherent starting point if the next stage is to produce useful answers rather than ongoing collection of possible creations and combinations. So drawing on what we've heard from our community and the principles I believe that they have let us know they want us to be guided by, I think the next stage we should be looking at is, should we create machinery and governance that is genuinely needed for effective representation and meaningful local voice and decision making. How do we do that? If local boards are considered, their purpose, functions, funding and accountability must be clear. Any local boards should make genuinely local decisions and not duplicate regional decision making or create councils or recreate the councils that amalgamation is intended to replace. If we just rename our current councils as local boards, we've also failed our community, in my view. At the same time, the regional governing body must be able to govern in the interests of Hawke's Bay as a whole. The community should not have to guess where the regional mandate sits or who is accountable for the region-wide decisions. And that's why these recommendations also signal a preference to have one clearly defined mayoral office of the unitary authority, with any local board leadership clearly distinguished from that regional role. It will ensure there's no split mandate or confusion in the community. Look, as we know, recommendations F and G do not settle the final design and they don't slam the door on the other options that may be tabled by our neighbours. But they do establish the questions and standards the detailed work must answer from what I believe should be a Hastings perspective, including fair and workable representation, connection with rural, remote and distinct communities, clear responsibilities for region-wide functions, meaningful local delegations where they add value, and transparent comparison of costs, benefits and trade-offs between the models. Team, I want to be clear, the reason why I haven't specifically listed a preference for C and D is because I cannot see a functioning model in New Zealand where that is working right now. It would be something completely new, and I have concerns at the moment, which may be able to be traversed with discussions with our neighbours, around how that would ensure that those who are elected to local boards that automatically feed up to the regional entity would know they still need to represent the whole region. That is my concern. I think it creates an area of ambiguity. So team, I have put forward a starter for 6. I am moving those recommendations, F to K, and I am looking for a seconder if one exists at the table. Thank you, Councillor Lorcan. All right, team, that means we have a substantive motion on the table. However, you know how we roll here in Hastings, which is if someone has a concern and they would like an alternate considered, you can raise that and the mover and the seconder can consider it. But again, I'd like to emphasise what I've tried to do with these recommendations is not slam the door on other options, but it is making a clear preference of those that we know through looking at other councils and other ways of operating in New Zealand could meaningfully work for our communities and achieve what they've told us they want, which is that balance between cost and local voice. So I'm going to open the floor. Questions or debate? Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Your Worship. And first of all, thank you for suggesting that we pursue more than one of these options. I'm sure I'm not the only one around the table today with reservations about the various options within the 1-tier and within the 2-tier options themselves. My starting point in all of this, and I've been very clear about this from day one, is my concerns about the concentration of power in an ever-decreasing number of hands and ensuring that that local voice is heard, or to put it another way, the dispersal of that power throughout our community. The 2-tier option that you've put forward here, if I'm not mistaken, is the Auckland model.
It's option B.
Sorry, option B, yep. So we've got the option 2 in our papers and 2 on the F2, either way. The Auckland model, I have serious reservations about. It's tried and tested, I acknowledge that, but it has more than its fair share of critics as well. The issues, as I understand them, with the Auckland model is that local boards are isolated and under-resourced. They have no self-determination, partly because they have no ability to set their own rates, nor do I think we should pursue that. They effectively survive on scraps allocated to them by Auckland Council, and they are known to stitch each other up on planning. I'm not convinced that it will unify our region in the way that we would like to see this whole project outcome. In my opinion, the Auckland local boards are set up to fail and take blame rather than to maintain transparency or accountability. It's my least preferred of the two-tier options, and so I would be proposing an amendment to replace that option with pretty much any one of the other two-tier, with all due respect, Madam Chair. It's my position that the two tiers, if we are going to pursue a two-tier option, that the two tiers must be connected by mutual representatives, and that's reflected in the other options, but not in the option that you put forward.
I'll just ask a question on that before we move on, Councillor, if that's all right. Mr. Charteris or potentially Mr. Eagleson, could you let us know if option B was to progress through development, could there be the ability for a member who's elected to the overarching unitary authority to be allocated as a representative to the local board, as is seen with our rural community board at the moment? I'm just interested to understand if that's possible to create the connection Councillor is talking about. Thank you, Mr. Charteris.
Through you, Mayor, I think that is entirely possible in the way that I've read it. We haven't, the option has not been specific about how the regional councillors might play a role in the local boards. It's been more a consideration of whether the local board members themselves would occupy seats at the regional council table. So it's entirely possible that with your guidance that could be a variation that's considered down the track. That's the way that I would be looking at it.
Councillor, I'm not asking you to change your position in any way, but the question I've got for you is, given that was highlighted as one of your areas of concern, that connection, if an action was taken away, if this progressed as it stands, that we would like to see that modelling as part of the next step, would that give you some confidence in progressing? And you're allowed to say no. And you can consider it as well.
Before I consider it, can I ask, referring back to the workshop that we've just had and looking at those international examples, would that correspond sort of to the Toronto example, or is the Toronto example more what's described in our papers as option F3, with the local chairs sitting on the Unitary Authority Council?
Mr. Charteris?
Through you, Chair. No, you were absolutely right. And my understanding of what you're talking about would be similar to the Toronto model, where you've got a councillor taking some responsibility for a community board, local board, or something in a shepherding, connecting way.
All right, I'll sit down and think about that.
Absolutely.
Right, Your Worship.
And on that basis, because I have presented you with a question, Councillor, you do get a second bite at the cherry. I will allow you to speak again. I'll come now to Councillor Nolustick.
Thank you, Chair. While I have every faith in the HDC with proportional representation for the rural area, it does concern me a little that we don't have something maybe a little more solid in there. It's not, I realise this is just a decision for this table, but to take to our neighbours not so very far away, that they perhaps don't have as good an understanding of rural representation as the HTC does. That I'm just a little bit worried about just losing a little bit of ground.
So if I may extend on what you've just said and ask the officers and yourself actually, would it help develop confidence again if another action was taken away and fed back into the next step of the regional work, that again re-emphasising that representation for rural communities across the whole region is a critical element of this? Bearing in mind that, by the way, we're not making the final decision today, team. The proposal will come back to us for challenge. Would that help, Councillor?
That would help, but yeah, so just to put it in more simple terms, that across the regional entity, however that ends up, is we have at least 1/8 of the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, I'll now come to Councillor Teo Skipworth.
Thank you, Worship. I was just seeking a seconder for my question that I'm going to ask. So I would like to propose an addition. We're nearly halfway through the alphabet. So we're looking at...
Let's set a new record.
Yeah, we're looking at L. And a couple of my fellow councillors have mentioned community feedback. We don't want outsiders to decide for us. And so my addition proposal is based on the feedback from my community that we've tried to put across since 1840. And often it's heard, but very rarely acted upon. So without going on too much, I would like to propose that L is any outline proposal submitted under the Head Start pathway should clearly state that it is conditional on full community consultation. And I acknowledge the consultation that we have done, but I think it was very minimalistic, not on our part, but given the time frame. So I'll head back to the resolution. Consultation before any final proposal is submitted in March 2027. Financial modelling to confirm the benefits of the proposed local government reorganisation model and development of an effective model for Māori representation and the giving effect to treaty settlements, redress arrangements, including and in particular, but not limited to, the Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee. And I'm happy to take that to Lynn for us to have a look over and explore.
Thank you, Councillor, and I think you're echoing actually a recommendation, and I like seeing it, that was moved in CHB and accepted by their team as well. So what I'll do is I'll ask the team to try and bring that up on screen. They may need a few minutes, and if you're happy, Councillor, we'll move around the table for some more questions, and I'll come back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, there was a couple of additions I added to that.
Oh, okay.
From
Could
CHB,
you
so,
come forward
yeah,
and talk to Democratic Support? Okay, so while that's taking place, we'll come now to Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Worship. Reading the papers and listening to the discussions, it reminds me of something Winston Churchill apparently once said, that democracy was the worst possible form of governance, except for all the others. And I think we're sort of struggling a little bit with that concept. The thing that worries me most is that this is an opportunity that we can step ahead in terms of efficiency and cost effectiveness. Because we've come under a lot of criticism over the last year or two, rates and costs and all the rest of it. And I do think we need to keep in mind that we should be trying to do something about it. And so when we start talking about additional levels of governance, it actually worries me, because I feel that is going to be additional cost, additional delay, additional ineffectiveness. Now, I know your motion deals with that, in that this is only a first step. And I wouldn't support it if that was not the case, because I have some concerns. So that's my position. I really want to I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of what we're trying to do. And that's what government's trying to do. It's trying to make local government simpler than it is, because it is awfully complicated at the moment. And so long as we don't lose sight of that at this stage and subsequent stages, I think I will support, as I supported the first part of the motion, because we have to do something. It's time to move forward, and so I will vote for it.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councillor Nixon. And we will absolutely be able to fully test the future worked up models against the criteria you're talking about there. I note that Democratic support may just need a moment, so I'll just give them a moment and then we'll return back to Councillor Teo Skipworth. I'll just make sure that everyone's had an opportunity to read that proposed amendment to the recommendations that are currently sitting in front of you. I'm not seeing anyone saying that they haven't had a chance to read it. Just looking at that and to summarise, and Councillor Teo Skipworth, please do let me know if I've captured this incorrectly, but as I understand, you are reiterating our commitment already, which I think is good to do in the recommendations around this is conditional on full community consultation before any final proposal is submitted in March 2027. So just keeping that in mind, that August 9th is the outline proposal. The full and final, if we get in principle support from government, is by the March 27. And then we're looking also at making sure that the financial modelling confirms the benefits of the proposed local government reorganisation, which absolutely we must do. Otherwise, we could well end up in a situation where we're not more efficient. So we need to make sure that the final model is. And that also, which is a requirement that government has put upon us, that we give effect to treated settlements and look at how, under the Local Government Act, we provide for Māori representation. I note that Councillor Daniel has his hand up. So what I'm going to do, because he has been waiting patiently on there, is I'm just going to note down the speaker list as it stands. If everyone can please turn off the microphones, we'll come to Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, through your worship. I just want to say that I'm happy to support this. I think one thing that we also need to remember is that under the Local Government Act, we have statutory obligations under it. So having this there actually aligns us with our Local Government Act. So I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Daniel. Okay, team, as the mover, I'm happy with that amendment. Seconder, Councillor Lorcan, are you happy with the proposed amendment? I am. In which case, we are going to absorb, the mover and the seconder has confirmed that they would like to absorb the proposed amendment within the recommendations. So instead of treating it as a separate amendment, Mr. Cameron, the mover and the seconder of the motion, the original motion, have agreed to absorb it. Okay, the mover of the amendment was Councillor Teo Skipworth, and the seconder was Councillor Daniel, based on what he just said. Okay, team. So we are adding L to the debate for your information. So again, it's reaffirming what we've committed to already, which is the proposal will be full community consultation, that we will do financial modelling to confirm the benefits before the March 27 application of the final proposal, and that we will give effect, as we are required to in this process by government, to the treaty settlement redress arrangements that currently exist. Government's been very explicit that we must do that. So it's not even a thing that we have a question mark on. All we're doing is confirming this in. Right, team, I'm going to ask you to turn back on your microphones in the order in which they were on before. So hang on, I'm going to read it out. So they were Deputy Mayor Fowler, Councillor Corbyn, Councillor Montepero Hendry, Councillor Milmine, Councillor Ratcliffe. And then anyone else who wants to tap themselves on the end is very welcome to do so. Okay, team, I will come now to Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. I speak in support of the motion, and for me, I think the key to this is simplifying local government, and we will work through all of this, but it is no use creating, and I think if I hear Councillor Nixon's point, a corporate behemoth which has another layer of bureaucracy to cope with any other structure that we develop. So I think it's beholden on us to, and that's encapsulated in, I think, Councillor Skipworth's recommendation, L, about that. So I am concerned as we move forward that tails don't wag dogs, that we still think regionally and we don't create structures which pit localism against regionalism, and I think that is a real danger that could happen, otherwise a perverse federal versus state arrangement. So,
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Fowler. I'll come now to Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you, Worship. I'm not comfortable with F2. I'd be looking forward to the debate and discussion on options B, C and D, which we haven't had. And I think I've been asking for about 2 or 3 weeks when we're going to get those workshops on that. Why I'm not comfortable with it is because I see it as a disconnect between council and local, and I see it as top-down rather than bottom-up.
Thank you, Councillor. And just to clarify again, the recommendations are not designed to rule out the other options. It's simply demonstrating a preference.
Yes, well, I'm not sure that it doesn't rule out the other two. I think it should be more broad than what it is.
Okay, so what I'll do is let's come to some other speakers, and then I'm very happy to take an adjournment and have you speak with the officers to see what you may propose there. Because as I said, we're trying to design something that the whole council can ideally feel comfortable with. So I will come back to you, Councillor. Okay, so I'll come now to Councillor Montepero Hendry.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just listening to Councillor Ratcliffe, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Corbyn, looking at F2, I'm just wondering if there was a hybrid between F2 and F3 without making it really complex, just for direct advocacy to stop that federal versus state and hold accountability, that maybe where it says in local boards with elected board members and a board chair with a co-chair of an elected member may satisfy some of the council, that would mean that the governors and the local boards were handcuffed together.
Sorry, could you repeat that for me? I wasn't quite following.
So basically, we've got your board chair. You would just insert with the board chair would co-chair with one of the elected ward councillors. So therefore, you've put a hybrid of the 3 and the 2, where the council would be a representative on that board subcommittee, and that would be coming up to the full table, and it would sort of blur the federal versus state line and bring more unity.
Okay, so again, I'm starting to angle towards an adjournment so we can tease a bit of this out. I'm not against what you're saying, I just don't fully understand it at this point, so I just need to wrap my head around it. So if you don't mind, I'm going to note that down. I see Councillor Ratcliffe wildly waving his hand around, so I will come to him.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia. And thank you, Your Worship. I think what you're getting at is pretty much exactly what I'm over here considering at the moment. So I'm keen to have a chat with councillors Montepero and Corbyn at the adjournment.
Okay, so just keeping in mind, team, like I'm really happy for this to happen, but we're not designing the representation model right now. It got to be kept high level, okay? So by all means have the chats, but I would be loath for us to actually start designing too far. That's the next step.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, acknowledging Councillor Corbyn's call for debate on this as well.
Absolutely. So I'll come now to Councillor Milne.
Thank you, through your worship. I too support these few views that we've just had, and I think while cost has been something that is very important to everyone that I've spoken to, I think that is a sign of the times, and this needs to be something that's best for the long term. And I think that that local voice and that mutual representation is really, really important to anyone in those communities. And
so
I just don't want to block that out in this.
No, and again, reiterating, we're not blocking out any options with this, but what I am hearing around the table is what option in the paper are you talking about?
I kind of, like, it's not any of them specifically, but C, something between probably B and C might a little bit more so, but I just think the regional.
Is that, sorry, I'm just going to look to the two other speakers. Is that reflective of what you were thinking too? Is something somewhere between B and C without getting too specific? Yep. Okay.
I hadn't excluded D.
Okay. No, that noted. And again, reiterating, we're not excluding any options, but it's just good to know if there's a really strong preference in a certain direction. Okay. Councillor Milne, sorry.
And one more thing. So with the addition that Councillor Te Skipworth has added on to the recommendation, I don't understand what that Hawke's Bay Regional Planning Committee or something that was specifically mentioned at the end is. So I wouldn't feel comfortable voting on that at this point.
Okay, so can I suggest you ask a question of the officers then to seek clarity on that?
Are you able, is there something that you can provide me that I can read to understand that?
So officers, could you please speak to what the RPC is?
The Regional Planning Committee is a statutory function that gives effect to treaty redress in terms of how we carry out regional the regional planning that needs to be taken forward.
So it's mandated by government that it must continue to exist and move into the next entity.
That's what I thought.
So just so you know, it's not even an option to leave it out.
So that, yeah, well, that's what I needed, that understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come now to Councillor Gibson.
Just looking at the boards, we're in a council of 90,000 people. We don't have any meaningful community boards. The rural board doesn't make decisions. Would that be correct? They're not binding decisions. So we're looking at a model that goes above that to actually give them, with B, to give them some decision-making ability, like civic awards, for example. Of course, I was initially for A, where it's the greatest cost savings, but looking at what CHB have said this morning, and I do see some benefit, and it will be a great way to bring them on board by having that degree of community boards. But I'm not a fan of, like Councillor Nixon said earlier, of Hastings and Napier having community boards. We work quite well without them now through the council, and I don't see why that can't continue. And I really don't support C and D, the other ones, where they, it's just not democratic in my view. The level of democracy, I think we need to be electing that regional council, the new regional council, not representatives that they pick and choose their own ones that go up ahead. Like if they're representing, you get a group of 6 people and they go there, mate, oh, we'll have him go ahead, and he may be the lowest polling person, and the community will be outraged. And the latest amendment, I don't see the representation issue when we have a democracy where everybody has one vote and everybody is treated equally, as per Article 3 of the treaty.
So sorry, just for
I'm
clarity.
not supportive of that last new amendment, just that piece. I'm happy to have meaningful engagement and have Mana Whenua included. I just don't, just that representation concerns me, that we're going to have unelected or elected people based on race, and I'm not a fan of that.
So again, to be clear, Councillor, we can't, the government has signalled they're removing the part of the Local Government Act that would allow unelected representatives, so that's not a concern.
That's not what the wording says.
The wording, if the government changes the legislation, no matter what wording we put in, we can't overrule government legislation, and they've indicated they're changing the legislation. Does that give you peace of mind to continue?
No, the wording says, representation, specifically says representation. Why? That
So,
goes against what the government
so
says.
again, I'll just specify as well that councillor representation can be different to voting as well. It can simply be, as the government has said they will allow with their legislative change, people with speaking rights around the table. Representation takes many forms. Do you have any other clarifying questions on that? No? Okay. I'll come now to councillor Nixon. Although, councillor, you have spoken to this. Is it a question?
Was the amendment there when the last?
No,
amendment?
actually, that's fair. You're right. The amendment wasn't there.
I didn't think it was. Yes, I do want to speak to the motion. And I too have a problem with the addition of that clause L. And I hear what you say about government law, but for a start, let's take into account we had a referendum only a few months ago where government gave communities the option of deciding did they want Maori wards or not. And this council voted not to have them. That is the first thing. Secondly...
Point of order, Your Worship, it wasn't the council, sorry. Point of order, Your Worship, it wasn't the council that voted not to have Māori wards?
Thank you, councillor, you're right. So, councillor, it was the community voted, not
Sorry,
the council.
I did mean the community. Incidentally, that wasn't a point of order, but that's all right, I'll let it go.
Well, actually it was based on factual information, so carry on,
I didn't
councillor.
think that's what a point of order was, but anyway, that's all right. So the community did vote against specific Maori wards, and I think in including that is actually flying in the face of the vote that took part and the intention.
Councillor, I'll just
Point
pause
of
you.
order.
Nothing in the recommendation says that we're reintroducing Māori wards.
If it says Maori representation, then that should be defined.
The member is deliberately conflating Māori wards with Māori representation.
Okay, thank you, councillor Ratcliffe. I will clarify for you, councillor Nixon. Representation can simply mean speaking rights. It can mean part of a, as we have now, a Heretaunga Tokatanoa Māori Standing Committee. The government has made it clear that it will be changing legislation that will remove the right under the Local Government Act for councils to appoint voting unelected members. However, it's also specified that that councils will still be allowed to have people with speaking rights. That is what the representation refers to.
Then I'm confused because in G it talks about the development of governance structure. Now,
Which is for the unitary authority.
so governance structure, does Maori representation, and those are the words that were in the amendment, does that not become part of the structure?
Councillor, if you're concerned with the wording, then I invite you to talk to Democratic Support and find some wording that would make you more comfortable.
I'd be happy to do that.
If you would like to propose that to the mover, you can do that.
I don't have the words yet, but I'm expressing some
All right,
concerns.
team. I think what we'll do is we'll take a short adjournment. I invite anyone who has said that they need to have a yarn to Democratic Support or to officers to do so. We'll take 10 minutes and we'll be back here at 3:40, please. Okay, elected members, if you can please take your seats, we'll reconvene the meeting. Thank you, team. So, look, we had two conversations going before the break. One of them was around the amended L that was added to the recommendations, and one of them was around F2, which was specifying a preference in terms of direction for a two-tier decision-making system. As a mover, I've heard quite a bit of dialogue around the table, and I understand where actually everyone's coming from. And the next steps are going to be really important. So on that basis, I've reflected over the break and would like to make a proposed change to F2. And I'm just wondering, Democratic support, if you could please bring that up on screen for everyone. And I'm hoping it will encapsulate and give a bit more certainty to the elected members that we're not trying to overly simplify what options come next, but we are showing sort of a preference in what we want to be considered in the next steps. So the proposal is that F2 changes to a potential two-tier decision-making model for a single Hawke's Bay unitary authority that is guided by the parameters in recommendation G. So essentially what it's saying is that local boards would become an option, but what that model looks like, whether it's option B, C, D, a hybrid, because we've talked about hybrids, or some new invention, is actually tested against the priorities and preferences that we've heard from our community and are outlined in G. So that's my proposal, to try and find that middle ground that gives everyone confidence that we're not completely closing anything off, because we're not doing the representation design today, and I've heard some good ideas around the table, and they deserve to be tested. So I'm seeing lots of nodding heads, but I also respect people may need a minute to scan their papers. So I'm going to come, Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy with that amendment.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you again to everyone who has voiced their areas of concerns and ideas, because that's what's going to help us get to a good place. So I'd like to come first of all to Councillor Lorcan, who is the mover of the recommendations with me. Are you happy, Councillor Lorcan, with that change?
I'm very happy, thank you.
Thank you. So team, that becomes the substantive motion that's on the table. I'll come now to Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Your Worship. My concern is that this change goes to the other end of the spectrum and doesn't actually constitute a decision. It leaves us with options F1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 all still open to us.
Yes, it does, because that's what we've heard around the table, that people want an opportunity to design further.
We've also heard that we'd like to debate the options 2, 3, 4 and 5.
So remember, we don't have enough detail to debate the options today. What we're debating is which one should be worked up more. And what I've heard from the table is there is enough different views that we actually shouldn't close the door on options right now. And you can hold a contrary view if you'd like to, Councillor, but that's what I've heard.
I feel as though we were getting close to being able to use F2 to provide officers with some direction.
Would you like to ask the question of the officers?
Is it appropriate for us to ask the officers if we should make a decision or not, being guided by how much work we will or we will not be creating for?
I think, how about I frame a question? Councillor Charteris, Councillor Charteris, Mr. Charteris, my goodness. We'll do a swap. Mr. Charteris, can you please let us know if we adopt this recommendation as outlined, is that going to create too much ambiguity and not enough direction for staff and the regional office to continue?
Thank you, Chair, through you. The conversation itself today has provided really useful insight about where you all sit. It's clear that we need so we'll shape that workshop for next week so that we dig into some of these elements. Remembering G is starting to help narrow some of provide some parameters for us to work on. So it's not problematic from my perspective. The conversation's been the most important thing. We weren't seeking a decision today. In any case, it was just signalling a preference to guide the next stage of work. So it wasn't a full decision. We haven't heard any support for the advisory board option. You have the option of signalling removing that one if you wanted genuinely to narrow some options. CHB have chosen not to take that one forward, and same as Napier actually. So both Napier, we actually a bit of information. Napier have agreed to move forward with a single unitary authority, and have signalled a preference for options 1 to 4 to continue to be worked up. So they have, by doing that, have signalled a preference not to take forward the advisory board option. So just in case that's useful additional information, but no, to go back to the original question, not an issue for the next stage.
Can I ask another question about it then, please?
Of course.
So is there a danger with leaving F2 vague that further down the line there will be an automatic preference towards F1?
The final decision making is coming back to us, Councillor.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come now to Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. This recommendation satisfies my concerns. Could I respectfully suggest or ask next week we have a whiteboard in here when we go through these one by one, because it's a very, very useful aid.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, are there any other questions? Any other debate? No, thank you, team. I really want to recognise the thoughtful questions and debate that's happened so far today. This is big, and it's not the final piece by any stage. But certainly the ultimate goal is simplicity without disconnection. And I think that's got to be our driving force, is how do we achieve those two things which are competing. And that's what the next phase of these recommendations will allow us to do. I am going to break up the recommendations, also hearing from elected members and their preferences. So what I am going to propose is that we put initially recommendations F as outlined on screen, because there's that modification. G, as is found in your handout. H, which is found in your handout. I, J, and K as found in your handout. And then we will put recommendation L separately. Okay. On that basis, I am going to put recommendations F as amended on screen through to K. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried unanimously. Well done, team. Right, I will now come to recommendation L. If we can bring that up on screen, please, Democratic support. And again, confirming the wording of representation does not imply Māori wards, it does not imply voting rights. It is simply acknowledging that in the Local Government Act, we have to find a way for Māori voice to be heard, and we're asking that that be explored. Okay, I've got two speakers. I'll come to Councillor Nixon first.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I've spent the break trying to find a word that I find more acceptable. I've got one, but I'm not sure that it would be widely accepted around here. But recognition is a word that I would find more agreeable, because representation to me has a specific meaning. I do not want to rule it out. I'm quite happy to accept something in there that would be, are you going to check it, are you? I just feel there's a better word that would meet my needs, but still be consistent with the, that item L.
As the mover but also acknowledging that Councillor Teo Skipworth moved this particular recommendation and Councillor Daniel seconded, but it was then adopted by me into my recommendation and seconded by Councillor Lorcan. And having just Googled the definition of representation, I remain comfortable, so won't be supporting an amendment, but respect your right to request that, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Lorcan, do you agree or disagree as the seconder?
I agree with the mover.
Okay, agree to retain the wording. Okay, I will come now. Oh no, that's right. So in which case, if there's no other debate or questions, I'm going to put those recommendation, or that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, Councillor Nixon and Councillor Gibson. In which case, that's passed. Well done, team. What has taken place today here is significant work and a significant step on a journey that is still continuing for our regional community, not just here in Heretaunga Hastings. I acknowledge that everyone has put in a huge amount of work and set aside as well very personal ties and loves of the roles that we all play in our community, and recognising that this means huge change across the entire region, whatever is next. And I acknowledge that. That's professionalism at its best. So thank you all. We have a lot of mahi still ahead of us, for sure. The next bit is delving more into that representation, while also understanding that we will not have everything solved by the 9th of August, but we will be a step closer and have enough, if we are of a mind to put forward a proposal. Councillor Teo Skipworth.
Thank you, Worship. I just want to, I'm sure on behalf of my fellow councillors and yourself, thank our staff and our officers, because I know the work that they have done has been on top of what they, LTP, so much, and I am a little concerned for them. Because it's not over, it's probably only going to get worse. And so I just wanted to acknowledge all our staff and officers, and thank you for your work, and please take care of yourselves.
Hear, hear, Councillor Teo Skipworth. Thank you. Beautifully captured. All right, team. There are no minor or urgent items, which means that we are at the conclusion of this hui. And I'd like to ask if someone could please lead us in our karakia, and I think Waiata is probably called for. That was an important step we just took. I am looking at Councillor O'Keefe, who seems to be tapping on his phone trying to find something. Councillor Gibson.
Chen Shang Fu, when one does, when he die, Ming Wei Zhang. When the na qua lag lin, yin di dua ji ji jing, di zhang vu tong ching dai zi zhang. Waman wa yong dan yin shi, jin ra ta gay wa man. Min wan man dai yin bru tong wa man min lan. Ra da e buji wa unyu ji zi ji twin. That was the Lord's Prayer in Mandarin, which is
lovely. Well done.
Come on, there we go.
Kumara Matanga
Kia ora team, thank you Councillor O'Keefe. Thank you to our community who has been potentially tuning in online. And a very, very special thank you to all of our community who has given us their feedback over this process. I acknowledge again Councillor Daniel who is online, and also thank you Mr Eagleson for your support in this process.